All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, A Point for a Place, where we're going to be talking all about address points. This webinar is part of our Spatial IQ for MapGeo educational webinar series. We've been hosting these webinars for the past 5 years. We host a webinar once every quarter. And the primary aim of these webinars is to provide some education to local governments on some new technologies that might be applicable to their communities. And all of our webinars are recorded, and we have a link at the very end of this presentation for where all of our past webinar recordings are. So let's get started. So a little bit about Spatial IQ before we get started. Spatial IQ is a managed services program dedicated to help Spatial IQ MapGeo subscription clients to increase their GIS and raise their Spatial IQ. Throughout the year, different subscribers based on different tier options that we offer can get a variety of services. It can be anything from a help desk support to having dedicated GIS support budget, along with their annual GIS data updates. The Spatial IQ program has been around for about 6 years or so, and we have about 30 plus clients. So we love to continue getting more clients. Our agenda today, we're going to be covering address points. Most commonly, address points are known for public safety. We're going to go over some of the basics and talk about some of the challenges that address points present at different levels of local government, whether it's local government and or the state. We're going to tackle some points that have different funding options as well. Let's get started. So here are our presenters. I'm Rebecca Talamini Davis. I am a project manager and I'm part of the Spatial IQ for MapGeo team. I've been with MapGeo for about 8 years and I primarily focus on local governments in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Carson, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Carson Bellino. I've been a GIS analyst here at AppGeo for coming on 3 years now. I've got about almost 6 years experience in the field, and I also primarily handle spatial IQ, municipal tasks such as that.
Great. So Carson, I'm going to pass things over to you to get started to talk about the importance of address points.
Awesome. So to start off, let's talk about why we're here, address points, why they're important, why focus on this. So as you probably all know already, address points are one of the most common location identifiers. So that's basically how people find a physical site, in a town, city, or state. It's used by the public and state and local governments for this purpose. What's really interesting about address points is that the local government is the authority on addressing, not the state, not the federal government. It means that the local governments, like the small counties, municipalities, and towns, those are the people that are responsible for creating and maintaining address points. So when a new building gets a new address point in a town, it's the local town's responsibility to do that. And so what these points are they're really the backbone of many local, state, and nationwide government projects for many different use cases and many really, really interesting initiatives and programs that we'll talk about later today. Next slide, please. So why do address points present a challenge? They're one of the most common data sets and important data sets, but there's an extreme amount of challenge behind them. And that's because over the last, decades, address points have been increasing in independently evolving, being maintained by thousands of local jurisdictions across the nation, and have a wide variety of use cases. So in a particular local jurisdiction, not all departments may have the same needs or naming conventions for an address. Geocoding, because of this, how you write out something like St. Mary's Street. Is St. Mary's a full word? Is it an abbreviation? Are there spaces? Do you have an apostrophe S or not? All of these things can present challenges when geocoding address tables. So it can be very difficult and time consuming when you start dealing with a master address table, just the table, and trying to get thousands of points onto a thing. There are multiple versions potentially in a single town. So they may, one department may have different information on their address data sets, and another department may have different information. There may be missing bits. So all of these things, these are challenges just within local governments themselves. So when we start going broader and talking about statewide and nationwide initiatives, imagine bringing all of these nuances, intricacies, and challenges together. So, one local government does it one way, another local government does it a completely different way. We have to bring all of those together to get some meat and get some data on how, to use these data points.
Great, thanks, Carson. Now that we know some of these important aspects to address points, excuse me, let's take a poll to see how many of you and your municipality, your county, your state, whatever you're from, do you maintain your own address points? Bear with me as I try to start the poll questions. Launch. All right, you guys should all be able to see a poll and your pop-up screen and say yes, no, or an I'm not sure answer. So far, we're looking like we've got about 40 people that say yes, they do have and maintain GIS address point data. There's a couple that are not sure, and very few no's, which is really good to hear. Looks like we've gotten most of the poll answers in already, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results so everybody can see how everybody else answered. That is a pop-up window. You guys should be able to just hit the little X button on the top when you're ready to close that. And we're going to continue to move on to talk about some fundamentals of address points. Carson, take it away.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm sure most of you, since a lot of you already maintain address point data, are very much aware of what an address point is. It's always just really helpful for these situations to kind of just go back quickly to the basics and just keep these things in mind as we move forward through the webinar. So the two basic and main components of an address point are the first part, the address string. So, address number, street name, zip code, state, town, all of these things make up an address string. And they can be presented in a variety of different ways, depending on how a town or even a department chooses to format these. The second part that goes from an address table, that is just a list of addresses, is the spatial coordinates aspect. That's your latitude and longitude, your X and Y coordinates. That gives your address string a physical location on a map in a GIS space.
Those are the basics. Let's continue on to address point placement.
Okay, so address point placement, traditionally back in the day, addresses were placed in the centroid of a parcel property, so a property's parcel. That's not the most accurate way. So as GIS systems have advanced, as we've gained more tools and capabilities and understanding of these systems, they've improved and these things have generally been updated. Now it's most common to see in the center one on condos. Under those annotations, there's that blue address point, and that's in the centroid of that condo. If you look in the bottom left, though, there are some other ways that we can actually display address points. So bottom left there, those blue dots are the address points for those buildings, but where they're positioned is actually on the front door of these particular houses. So these are great for emergency responders. They're able to see the access point first, front door entry access point right away. It's great for emergency response and just, another way that we can kind of expand, update, and make more precise address points. There's also the way of how you want to deal with multi-address buildings like condos or apartments. You can either have section out the areas like in the condos picture where each little space gets its own address point, or you can, on one single building, create basically a matrices of address points. On the bottom right, you can see that. So you have a floor of 8 apartments per floor, and those are basically shown as a left to right, your unique addresses, and then up is the amount of floors. So there's a lot of different ways that you can format address points to actually have meet your specific, use case needs. So let's transition over to some local government use cases,
Perfect.
and we'll address those.
So, oh, go ahead.
You want to take this one? Or
Yes, I can take this one. So for some of our customers that have utilities, particularly sewer in this example, we have one of our clients that displays their address points symbolized based on the color if they are a sewer customer and if they are connected to sewer, if sewer is available to their property, and if they're not connected, or if it's not available at all. So you can see those 3 different colors on this map. You have the blue where sewer is available, but they're not yet connected. The green parts are sewers that are connected and they have a lateral going to the house. And the red doesn't have sewer available at this time to those property owners. In the second example, we have another customer that utilizes their address points to link documents, such as their sewer lateral cards, to those address points. So in their Map Geo site, as soon as you click on a property that has a sewer lateral card, it'll have a link to the card itself, and it will pop up as a PDF in a separate tab on Map Geo. So while the sewer crews are out in the field, they're able to pull up these cards if there's ever an issue, if there's a question, if there's an emergency of some kind. All of the users on Map Geo can pull this up, particularly for the sewer crew, any EMS or fire crew, if there was an issue. The next topic that we're going to go over are some critical facilities. So we've done a couple of projects for clients regarding critical facilities, and these can range from schools, police and fire station, any municipal building, sewer pump station, any power grids, traffic control boxes, public parks, or even 55 and over communities. And there's certainly more that can be included. In the example on the screenshot, there's also water tanks. So for all of these, we were given an address from the town to geocode to the parcel, just so the parcel was viewable within the map instead of having a teeny tiny point. So the property was easier to highlight, but we needed those addresses to be complete in order to geocode and find those properties. So in what we had provided to the town was this beautiful map, but it also included a table based on what type of facility it was, a comment as to like the name of the school in particular, and then the address. So if there was an emergency, it was a quick and easy, let me throw in this address into my GPS and I can get there. Another example that we've done is for another client who would ask us to do a map book of their critical facilities, and that was a little bit more individualized instead of at a town level. So what we had done for them was created an aerial photo over the parcel itself. So that was one picture. The next picture was a zoomed in view of that same property, but just focusing on the buildings. And I believe it was the fire chief that we had worked with. He had asked that we put a little description on each of those maps that said like building entrance is a double wide door. There's a second entrance in the back of the building, different things like that. So they really, really appreciated having those maps so they can have in all of the first responder and emergency vehicles. Speaking of emergency, our next topic is jumping into emergency points. So these are almost like a child address point, where they're kind of a secondary address point to an asset on the property. And the first example, which is in the top left, we are calling out gas meters. So in this example, that green point kind of along the road is the primary address point of 50 United Drive. And then you have two other points. You have the white circles, which are the entrances and the doors to get into the building. And the two red crosses are the gas meters that are located along the edge of the building. If there was ever an emergency, they had to do an emergency shutoff of the gas. They knew exactly where those were. You weren't running around the building trying to find where everything was. So that's one use case of those emergency points. A second use of the emergency points is along a hiking trail. So for this particular property where this trail is, there's no physical street address, but it's known as the Kimball Trail. So in the address point for these emergency trail markers, it has the address of Hopkinton Road, and then it has I believe it's in the comment section where it says Kimball Trail, and then it has the emergency point number on there, so K1 through 7. So for example, if you were injured on the trail, you could tell the dispatcher that you were between emergency marker K2 and K3. And if you wanted to get a little bit more descriptive on this map, it also shows where the bridges are and any benches are. So you could tell the dispatcher that you're between emergency number K2 and K3 on the bridge. So those are really helpful in emergency situations, especially in areas where it's not a building, it's not a structure. So it's a little bit more organic as to how they could get to you in case of an emergency. Carson, I'm going to pass it back to you to talk about a districting example.
Fantastic. So whether it's for schools or voting, and here we have 2 images of both schools, school redistricting and voting districts, address points can play a pretty vital role in helping decision makers plan out their year or their voting districts, whatever that may be. And how that's done is we basically use address points to catalog, who, in this case of a school, where those students live, how many are in each school itself. So if you look on the right here, you have all those points in different colors. Those are the addresses of students and which school they attend. So what can be done with this is a school planner or organizer, they can look at this, they can see which schools are overpopulated, have too big class sizes, which schools can actually, accommodate some more students so we can transfer them over. And then you can use the spatial relationship of the address points to determine what students from these areas would have the least amount of impact if changing these schools. So you can look at commuting times, you can look at distance to the buildings themselves, and all these things. All of this also applies to voting. We use the address points to get a general sense of how many people are in a voting district and where that voting district goes to poll, its polling location. So we, again, can determine if there's too many people going to a particular polling location. Does that district need to be moved? Do we need to create another polling location to accommodate this district or something along those lines? So this is like another amazing example of how address points can be really utilized by local governments, school officials, and anybody to do a lot of planning and decision making and get some really, really solid concrete results from that.
I think a good thing to point out here too, Carson, is that you can see that there are a couple of residents that seem to be in the wrong voting district, or this one's schooling, I think.
That's school district.
But you can tell that there's something funky going on here. So it's almost like a quality check to say, okay, is this correct? Do we have our data wrong? So it's always nice to have that visual instead of just having that tabular data.
Okay, so let's talk about some broader initiatives. We've gone through state stuff. We've seen that there is a wide variety of things that you're able to do with address points and how those may be formatted in different ways. So let's kind of talk about some broader use cases on the state and the nationwide level. So we're going to start off with state broadband. Across the nation, there's been initiatives and efforts to increase broadband to underserved areas. If you're unaware, broadband is essentially internet access. It's becoming more of a fundamental right to participate in society. Prime example, we're all here virtually using internet to have this webinar. So it's quite a fundamental thing. In recent years, we've had the BEAD program, the Broadband Equity, Accessibility, and Development Program. We've had the ARP, the American Restoration Plan Act, provide a lot of funding to this. And so, we've seen states use this funding to also build out their address points because, again, address points are an incredibly authoritative data set. They're one of the backbones for broadband work. So in our case, we have worked with the Massachusetts Broadband Institute. It's basically the state's broadband office to create a modified version of their master address data set. And we'll talk about that master address data set, or MAD, later on in the webinar. But basically, we use that to format their statewide address data into a use case compliant for a BSL layer for broadband. And what a BSL layer is a broadband serviceable location. So basically it uses site structures, so address points that are on a structure like a site building, to determine if that building has broadband, how much broadband, like the speed of the download and the upload, or if it could have broadband, or if it's underserved. So you can use that again to get some really good planning data for the state, what areas are underserved, what areas are good, where can we direct this funding to get the most underserved people, the most amount of bang for their buck here, and the most amount of broadband. Thank you, Rebecca. So now we're going to go to I think my favorite one. Personally, whenever somebody brings up GIS and asks about what the field is, I generally bring up NG911 because it's such an important thing. It's really life and death, and it's really important. So what Next Generation 911 is, or NG911, is essentially an effort to create a more robust way of interpreting and receiving 911 emergency calls. So back in the day, 911 was routed through your telecom's phone address. So the phone that you had physically in your house, that was what, the dispatcher was getting that information and sending it to the officer so they could, respond, or the emergency response. Now, with the invention of cell phones, that kind of throws a big mess into it. Somebody can be in a random spot on the highway and call. There's a lot of different variations. We can also send video calls now. So there's a lot of things that NG911 is trying to do to build out and make it better for people to be able to contact 911 and emergency services and be better at that. I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but it's great to think about. And address points are basically one of the two fundamental parts, aside from road center lines, that make up this system. So as we kind of discussed earlier in the challenges section of the webinar, this is a nationwide effort. So NextGen 911, they identified all of this variation among thousands of local municipal address data sets. And they quickly realized we need to make a standardization for this. So they've made a NextGen 911 standard address format or schema. We won't talk about the specifics of that today, but we just want to highlight that it's kind of coming. If your local municipality isn't compliant or has the address points in that format, you are probably eventually going to have to get it into that shape. If you've already done that, great job. But if you haven't, don't worry about it. It's something that we can also help with by talking about broader and better best practices. So let's talk about best practices. If you want to go to the next slide. We've talked about how local government and, we have these wide broadband initiatives. So there's so many different use cases and so many ways to format address points. So, while local governments need to get this NG911 standardization to kind of help with these broader, really cool stuff, like saving lives, we still obviously realize that local governments have individual use cases that are distinct from those needs of the federal standardization. So how can you have an authoritative data set that meets the needs of something like NG911 and still allows your departments to efficiently figure out and use those for things like school redistricting, utility work, and things of that nature? So let's talk about that a little bit. So, we have all these hurdles. So let's, the first thing that I want to say about this is that as with everything else in GIS, you get what you put into it. So really making a concerted effort to really say, we're going to sit down and we're going to tackle this problem is really the first step in kind of dealing with all of this. So what I would recommend, you identify your situation, who has data currently? Is there an authority on the data in your town? Are there multiple variations of the data? How is the current methodology for distributing changes to that data from the authority? How do you currently format like the address string and things like that? These are all things you want to have before you sit down, with all of your relevant department heads, stakeholders, whoever uses your data on a daily basis. And then from there, you can define the needs of the water or utility department, the public assessor's department, whoever is using this, all of you define together what are the needs for your town, for your address points. Once you've done that, you're able to agree upon a standard data format. Unfortunately, we can't give you specifics here because every town, as we've kind of mentioned, is very unique. They all want different things. They all want them to be seen different ways, and they all have different use cases. So agreeing on a standard format for your own town is something that you can do as a team. Next slide, please. So the best thing about that is once you've done all that work, you don't want to lose it. You don't want it to go to waste. So future-proofing your address points is incredibly important. The best ways to do that are to implement a universal workflow for how updates and additions to that data set happen. So everybody, whether it's the Department of Works, Department of Assessors, they all know how to manipulate and change the address data that doesn't cause conflicts or issues later down the line when you go to geoprocess or use this data to actually discover or utilize it. Another really important part is defining a centralized authority and host for this data. So what that means is that there is a host that basically holds the authoritative and centralized data set of the address points. And what this does is it prevents, miscommunication from departments or non-communication from resulting in address point variations of your address points data from being created. So maybe the Department of Works, they make these additions and the Department of the Assessors doesn't see it because there's not communication happening. A centralized authority makes sure that everybody has that same data. When it's updated, everybody has the most recent copy, which is very important. So what this all kind of ties down to is really communication. It's building these things out. So this is why we highly recommend if you have a town GIS coordinator, you utilize them, or you implement or work with a GIS consulting company. They can really make all of this stuff much easier. The professionals on it. It just allows for a lot of the stress and difficulties with this to be taken away when you have somebody that really knows these GIS systems and can help your town meet your specific needs. So I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca, and she's going to talk about how some of our towns have kind of addressed that situation.
Great. Thanks, Carson. Yeah, your points that you just made, I think I'm going to kind of cover more a little bit in detail on each of those. So we have address points. We need to maintain them. What is the best way for your community to keep those address points updated, keep them authoritative, and make sure that everybody has access to that one same master geodatabase? You don't want to have to be maintaining 4 different geodatabases, one from the assessor, one from the planner, one for public works, one for public safety. It gets really confusing. So there's a couple of different ways that we've seen our clients tackle this problem. The first one is the screenshot on the left. That one is showing a street number assignment card that is distributed within different town departments. So you have the town administrator, public works, engineering, all of the police and fire chiefs, the assessor, and the building inspector, along with the clerk. But you also include other departments such as the USPS postmaster, the whatever state you're in. So this example comes from Massachusetts. So this one is sent also to the Mass GIS, the 911 director over there, as well as the homeowner of that property. And it has basic information. I've blocked out the homeowner's name and the homeowner's phone number, but it has everything else in there. It has the date that the request was submitted, what the request was for. So in this case, it was a new construction, so a new house. What street name it is and what street number it is, and a couple more details built out into that spreadsheet and who in the staff had assigned it. So that is something that gets shared through all departments. I've seen it come through as a nice kind of table looking like this, but I've also seen it come through as a traditional email and has everybody in that distribution list. So that's one way of keeping everybody in town up to date, current on what is going on. In terms of the address numbers, but in terms of the GIS for that aspect, in this case, the Public Works has their GIS department within Public Works. So Katie at that town, she will go in, add the address point, add the address into everything, excuse me, and that way it's in their master geodatabase within the town server. So everybody that has GIS on their computer has access to it, and everybody is using one master address geodatabase, which is awesome. Another example that we have is with West Hartford. Several years ago, AppGeo had built a custom addressing tool for them, and it's a entire maintenance workflow. So it incorporates all of the town stakeholders that would have a say in what the address is. So we're going to start off with the workflow in the center. So you have the editor and the planner, who are two of the initiators of a new address. So both of them can go into the address tool, create an address, provide the house number, the street name, the zip code, and if there's any other information that they can populate at the time, that's great. But those are the 3 minimum required fields for that first initiator to set up in the address tool. Once either of them have created the first address point, a notification automatically gets sent directly to the assessor to provide the property ID. If the property ID hasn't been created yet, it's still in the system, they at least have a address point in the data to work from. So once the assessor provides that property ID, their notification will then be sent to the GIS person, which in this case is AppGeo. So we get the notification that the assessor has approved an address point and has provided the property ID, the address number is correct, the street name, and the zip code, and provided any other information, if it's a unit number, whatever the case may be. So AppGeo would then commit that address point and approve it into the data. Again, all of this is living in one location, so everybody is using the same address list. Also, to that effect of maintaining, all of these editors have access to update something. So if an address changes, or if it's on a corner street and it changes to the other side of the street, they can easily go in and change that. We've made it super simple so that the street name is actually a drop-down list. So you can't misspell things, which was an issue for us in the past. So having that drop-down made a really big difference. And from this tool, one of the struggles that the town was dealing with was when they needed to create a permit for a new construction, a new build, or anything, they needed an address point in their permitting application in order to create the permit itself. So having this address tool, we've linked it to their permitting system to be able to work off of that an address point. It might not have that property ID and it might not have been approved by the assessor yet, but that's okay because eventually it's in that workflow, so the assessor will see it. But having that connection between the permitting system for the town for West Hartford made a huge difference in their workflow outside of addresses. It moved into permitting. So these address points make a really, really big impact on other departments that you might not think of. Or if they didn't have the GIS aspect to their permitting system, it might still be done on paper, which again, somebody has to input it into the computer. So having everything talk to each other using that one master address database makes a huge difference for everything. And it keeps the same standard. Everything is all there in there together. And it makes it really convenient. And keep in mind, address points can be customizable too. Not everybody has every single one of these attributes within their address data. Everybody has something different, but as long as you have all of the basics and all of the minimum standards that are in all of the nationwide standards for either NENA, NextGen, whatever the case may be, as long as you have those minimums, you can customize the rest to fit your use cases. You can include those utilities. You can include any other information that could be on the property if you want to link something else to it. Say you want to link a water card to it, similar to the sewer. You can do all of that in the address points and make it fit your needs and your use cases for your community. Carson, I'm going to pass things back to you to talk about the master address database that we had mentioned before.
Awesome. So as Rebecca had just said, please keep in mind standards on, NextGen 911, national standards. NextGen 911, it's the real big one. So what if you don't have that? What if you're a local government and you have an address data points, whether it be a master address that's centralized, or you just have a bunch of address data sets? None of those happen to be in NG 911 compliance standards. Well, here's where state GIS can help in some cases. So in some states, they have a GIS, statewide GIS department or website where you can get data. in this case, we talked about during state broadband, the master address data set for the state of Massachusetts. So what that is a statewide addressing. And that statewide address data set that MassGIS maintains on a weekly basis is NG 911 compliant. So let's say you're a town like Northborough that doesn't have their address points in NG 911 standards. You don't have to worry that much. You can go to MassGIS, you can download your town or county's specific data set. So it's in your, it is clipped out just for your particular area. And then, you can work with somebody to help create something that meets your needs and still has those NG 911 standards that were present in the state's master address data set. So in our case with Northborough, what we did is we took the MGIS data set. We got just the Northborough set of data. We created a one-time seed of that data set, and we used the town's assessors table, their CAMA, their address master table, because again, if you recall, the local authority, the local government is the authority on address points. They're the ones that create and delete address points, and those get fed up. So checking the state's data against the more authoritative local data is what we did to make sure that the state's data has the most accurate and up-to-date addressing based on the local government. And then we were able to use that one-time seed that we've then updated to be as new as possible to then tailor Northborough's specific needs that they might have with address points, whether that be something like school redistricting, or utility work, anything that Rebecca spoke about earlier. So that is a great way to kind of make a more robust system kind of a little bit easier. I think we're good for that slide. If you want to go to the next one.
All right.
It's kind of
wrap it up.
Wrap up with this idea, there's the state and nationwide level stuff, NG 911, broadband, all utilizing that stuff. It seems maybe like it's not as important to local governments, but you got to remember that you're the authority on your little, essentially a puzzle piece to the big overall picture. So, try to get involved. This is really cool stuff. Next Gen 911, it literally saves lives. It's going to save a lot of lives. So getting involved in that stuff, it's really great. Get passionate about it. You're the steward of that puzzle piece. Try to make it as good as possible. And, we're here to help as always. So, utilize everything that you can, because, again, with GIS, what you get out of it is what you put into it. Thanks, everybody.
Exactly. So with that, we're going to do one more poll. We want to kind of get a sense from all of you as to, does your municipality, county, or state have a master address data set? So basically this question is asking, are you all using the same one master authoritative address points, or are you still using assessing has their own address points and planning has their own address points? So let's just get a sense from the audience. So here comes the next poll. It looks like we're a little bit more no's than I had expected. 70% of you look like you have one master authoritative address data set, which is awesome. If you're still in that no category, let's talk about why. If you need any help from us, we're certainly here to help. Let's see. All right, I ended that poll and we're here to help, as I just said. So if you have any ideas, any questions that you want to brainstorm with us, certainly reach out. Our email is spatialiqsupport@appgeo.com, and we'll open it up to any questions from the audience. We have one question so far. Are there any guidelines on where address points should be placed, such as a location along a road center line, driveway entrance, center of the property, center of the primary structure, or primary structure entryway? Which of those is correct? Carson, would you want to take a stab at that one to answer it?
Sure. So in a lot of situations, the more accurate you can get it is going to be better. NG 911 does have standards for address point placement. It is generally, they have a kind of robust setup where you have a main address point, that is on the site structure that can be on the front door. It can be on the centroid of the building. Obviously the front door is more precise if that's what you're going for, but there's obviously different use cases. There are obviously also child points. So those would be really good to do something like driveway entrance, center of the property, where the electrical meters are, things of that nature. So it really isn't definitive, like you got to place it right here. It is, there are general goals and ideas that next gen 911 standardization tries to convey to make a very robust system. But basically, mostly it's on the buildings, and then child points denote other sub features on that property.
Yeah, and those child points, I believe, depending on what schema you're using, if you're using one of the national standards, I believe there's either a classification or a type field where you can denote like what the placement is denoting for where the location of that point is that you placed. So,
yes.
All right. Any other questions do we have? Let's see. I have one other one, Carson. Maybe you can answer this one. I don't know if my state has a master address data set. Where should I look?
The best place is to look at your state's GIS website. So if you can find the state's GIS department, in the case of Massachusetts, it would be massgis.com. And then once in there, they generally have a database search that you can find. Not all states have a master address or a statewide address data set. Unfortunately, it's something that should be built in the future. You local governments can certainly help by using and building out your address points a little bit more, which will make it easier if you kind of go with the NG 911 standards to kind of have your state bring all of this together. Unfortunately, if your state does not have it, you are slightly out of luck, but look on your state's GIS dedicated websites to find that information if it's available.
And I think within the next, let's say, handful of years, I think every state is going to be requiring it by next gen to at least have some type of statewide data set. So hopefully that's coming your way. And if not, we can certainly help get it for your community if that's what you're looking to do. We had one more kind of comment come in, not so much a question. We had someone say that the NINA has an informational document about all of the SAPs with the extensive discussion and examples of placement methodologies. So I'm going to put that in the chat for everybody. If I do everybody, then I can do it. There we go. So everybody should see that. That'll also come through in the recording. If there's any other questions, please send them our way in our email or reach out to us directly after this webinar. And we want to thank you so much for attending. And the webinar will be shared out for the recording probably in about a week or so. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye all.